We know that Trump, just a few hours ago, still pushing for that border wall, hoping to meet with Congress, wanting them to approve it. But what is the new Mexican president's view of what is happening there, and how does it differ from his predecessor?
There's a huge change taking place in migration policy here in Mexico since December 1st, when the new president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, took office. What he's calling for is a more humane approach to immigration, decriminalizing in many senses, and especially in many ways breaking from the anti-immigrant policies of its neighbor, the United States. They have created a pact with Central American countries, with Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, to go to some of the root causes of the migration, because the government insists that much of this migration is forced migration, that if conditions weren't so bad in the home countries, these people would choose to remain home, which is their right. So they're going to those root causes through a development plan that still we don't know the details of, that was signed the 1st of December, one of the priorities of the government. One of the things that we'll be looking at in terms of the new policy, though, is whether or not they bow to pressures from the United States to keep asylum seekers in Mexico as they await their processing, with this huge backlog and up to several years wait time in the United States.
So if López Obrador is working with Central American countries, how do you think he will deal with or work with President Trump on these border issues? And what is the latest on this Remain in Mexico policy that his predecessor started working on with Trump?
The predecessor, Enrique Peña Nieto, entered into this agreement called the Alliance for Prosperity, which was also supposed to look at root causes and development in Central American countries, but he also entered into a number of agreements to militarize the southern border of Mexico with Guatemala, working directly with the Southern Command of the Pentagon of the United States to block migrants from coming in. And the southern border plan in Mexico, that's been partially funded by the U.S. government, has increased the number of deportations of Central Americans from Mexico back to Central American countries dramatically in the last couple of years. So what they're looking at now, they have not announced that these measures will cease, but they're looking at a different approach that instead of mass deportation will provide employment in southern Mexico by developing southern Mexico, will cease to stop the need to flee from Central Americans, and will provide more rights for Mexicans in the country. At the same time, they are looking at an increased need to process asylum seekers in Mexico. In this last caravan that started on October 13th and reached the Mexican border on October 19th, there was an announcement that more job visas would be supplied, and there's been a focus on trying to meet humanitarian needs, although there have been sporadic incidents of repression as well.
All right, Laura Carlson, thank you for joining us from Mexico City.